So, look, folks, conscious of time, it's a lunch and learn, and we're delighted to have you with us here this afternoon. We're recording this session from a GDPR point of view. So, just to keep you advised, if that's any issue, please feel free to step off. I'd ask you to mute your microphones as well for those of you who are stepping on, and I'll keep an eye on the links in terms of progressing over the next half an hour or so. So, really excited to be taking the ship of state out again in terms of the IMCA lunch and learn modules. We've had a really powerful series over the last couple of years, and we take a little break for the summer, do some fly fishing, do some R&R, watch the rugby and so forth and so on. But now we're back in the saddle, and we're taking it out with a bang today with our colleague Lawrence Belcher. And Lawrence, you'll clearly tell from his accent, is born and bred Irish. Or his mum is. Anyways, in fairness, we were just discussing earlier, he's of Dublin origin, so we're a yin and yang. Even though I was born in London, I'm living in Dublin, and conversely, Lawrence was the converse of that. So we're like a mirror. Only our mothers can tell us apart, really. Um, so the Institute is excited, as I said, to be partnering with Diligent on this particular issue, and we have a series of speakers coming up over the next period. And again, it's been a very fruitful one in terms of knowledge sharing and best practice in the respective fields, particularly those related to corporate governance and the whole area of management consultancy. And what we're looking at today is really cybersecurity. And we're going to have a chat when we look for your own kind of input. And if I could ask you maybe just to put in any questions you have in the chat box, we'll bring them up to Lawrence later on. But I mean, what we've seen, Lawrence, over the period, I mean, it's been an extraordinary growth phase over the last 36 months, particularly as we've gone into COVID. And you're looking at even in the last 6 months, the rise of, AI enhanced attacks and kind of that escalation there in that whole space. And the sophistication in that space has really kind of been kind of evolving at a rate of knots, unprecedented, I would say. AI is really ramping up the confusion in this space, particularly for boards of directors and management consultants in terms of threats and opportunities. And in that space of zero trust architecture and where we're going in that space as well, and what that means for people, and to understand that kind of that zero trust kind of architecture space. And again, we've seen supply chain attacks coming down the lines and the implications for that. And it's been extraordinary, the over reliance we have in particular kind of areas, and once those supply chains are attacked, they go down, and we're seeing them more regularly. And indeed, in the last week or two, we've seen some. I saw in the news last night there was another supply chain attack, and we're seeing that as well. Quantum computing trends and threats escalating at a rate of knots. I know this is kind of like meat and veg to you, Lawrence. But for a lot of our members, this is kind of new terminology that's coming into the space at a rate of knots. Privacy regulations, GDPR, CSRD, and so on, they're also coming down. Cloud security and the implications for cloud security, I guess, is prevalent all over the place. And a lot of us have, although reluctant at first, have embraced the cloud, and a lot of our data is up in the cloud. And whether it be in the European context or in the American context or here in Ireland, where a lot of data is actually maintained, we have huge data centers here in the Irish context. So the implications of that in terms of cybersecurity as well. And ultimately, the whole thing kind of is based on human engagement as well, and the whole area of the short supply in terms of cybersecurity workforce. There's a huge issue there as well, I would imagine, in terms of getting specialists such as yourself, Lawrence. I mean, you must be hen's teeth in terms of availability. You'd be very popular in the recruitment market from that perspective. So I hope they're looking after you well and diligent there. So I mean, it's that sort of area that we'd like to maybe kind of get your thoughts on in terms of just hitting it with a bang and giving us a few snapshots. And what's your sense of where the market is and where the big threats are at the moment? We'll take it out from there, perhaps, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Patrick. That's a very uh, honest introduction to me. And as you said, I think my accent betrays some of my family roots, unfortunately, which certain members of my family may not be too pleased when I go back over and see them at Christmas. But as I said, quick sort of reintroduction myself. As I said, I'm over here at Diligent. I look after the IT cyber security and compliance element of Diligent. For those of you who aren't aware of Diligent, Diligent was founded in 1994 and have worked their way over the last 29 years, if my maths is correct. Close enough. I think that's wrong, actually. In terms of being the largest GRC organization in the world. And what I mean by that is very much in the depth and breadth of the organization. So things like 25,000 clients across the world, over 2,000 employees, have 89% of the FTSE 250, and pretty much similar to the FTSE 500 as well, all across 130 countries with uh, organizational and operational elements based in Galway. We've got a very large presence over in our Galway office, which I'm due over in September, I think, actually, to come have a flying visit. I will be in Dublin as well at some point for the Osaka conference, if any of you guys are also attending that. Of course, we've got offices in likes of New York, Budapest, London, and across the globe as well. But back to your question, Patrick, in terms of what we're seeing in the trends, especially for 22 coming into 23, and of course moving over into 2024. There's been obviously the advances of technology, and I think unfortunately, as such is the way, is that the bad guys in terms of their technology and how they develop it is probably faster than the way that you can develop either counteracts or even legal legislation to operate amongst that. You obviously made the point uh, about AI. We've recently come out and seen I think he was the head of Google AI. His name surpasses me. I think he actually has a twang of regret being such a spearhead in that market, as we've seen with ChatGPT and all these other offshoots
Bard.
of
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of all of that nature. And that lends to, as we've all seen, supply chain attacks. Supply chain attacks is probably the most prevalent one, whether that's your internal processes and how you rank your vendors, and also making sure that they're at a certain level of security that your organization is willing to partner with them, whether it's based on location. I mean, I don't need to get anyone to understand if some red flags that might be raised if their head office is in Moscow, for example, and you're in a different part of the world. So all of these things are really coming together in terms of what is the best way and what's trending. And I think that leans into where organizations can be categorized as one, looking to restructure approach, I think is probably the best way to consolidate the phrase. That can
Okay.
be that's we've seen has been done by a number of ways, whether that's leveraging technology. There's a huge amount of tech of software out there for various things, such as firewall attacks, penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, of course, the wider suite of GRC, whether that's your governance, your risk, or your compliance, third-party vendors, privacy, all of these wide things. But I think one thing that now we've learned over the last couple of years, and especially due to COVID, due to the um, fractured nature of how we work in terms of lots more people being remote,
Yeah.
having things such as bring your own device. If I use my phone, for example, as a hotspot because my Wi-Fi is a bit iffy at home, what's the threat there? Because I've just got an open network here. So VPNs has become more prevalent and closed networks and things of that nature. As I've had many conversations over the last 6 months where organizations have now implemented technology and what they deem as safe technology and through their own due diligence, the key thing I think lots of people are understanding is that the more platforms that you have for certain areas of risk and compliance and all of these things, it actually creates a larger risk for the organization. Because
Yeah.
eventually all of these technologies are going to have to link together because they all eventually flow up to whether it's the CISO or even higher up into the C-suite and ultimately the board and the CEO. So we're seeing a very big trend in terms of can we consolidate all of our platforms under a singular roof? Because one, you've got the safety aspect because you've got fewer contracts and fewer vendors, therefore the likelihood of a supply chain attack is drastically reduced. But also the ability to have a consistent approach across your whole organization. So if you're using a platform that reports in in a certain way for let's call it your quantitative risk analysis, your operational risk team, and then someone's got a vendor risk tool which consolidates it in a completely different fashion, and the CISO just wants one singular report to have that single source of truth. It becomes it becomes almost a headache, and it really is a difficulty. So one of the key phrases that someone in a government department once told me when I was speaking to them about doing the very same thing is they want everyone singing off the same hymn sheet, which I
Mm.
thought was a really good simplistic way to understand the unification of platforms across your cyber IT to make sure that you're doing things across the right way. Um, is a key theme that we're seeing in sort of 23, 24, 25, because unfortunately in the world that we live in, lots of the organizations tend to be a lot more reactive than proactive. And what I mean
Yeah.
by that is it takes
Point.
a cyber attack and go, oh, that happened to those guys, it can happen to us. We've seen it in the real life world, unfortunately, with different legislations. I'm sure we're all aware of uh, the Manchester attacks a few years ago.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, obviously, they looked into their risk assessment profile and their cyber IT and things of that nature. And I apologize, we're going to be off topic here. But it turns out they were using three different platforms, doing three different frameworks, and now there's a new law coming in that essentially says if you're doing it this way, you essentially have to use a platform and communicate in all these kind of ways. But it took for that to happen for the likes of Wembley Arena and all of these huge global event organizers to actually say, right, we need to be doing better. And that works. And also, obviously, we've seen what happened. I know it was a few years ago, but obviously the Bank of Ireland had a big breach, and obviously the fine that came out there, I think it was 1.75 million. It was a
Yeah, I
big
mean,
one, wasn't it?
they've had a few breaches more recently as well, whether there were breaches or not. And I mean, the HSE, which is our the your national the NSA or whatever you call it over there, the National Health
Yeah,
our
we've just
HSE.
changed up. We call it UK HSA now, I think.
Okay, well, we have a HSE which had a huge hack here in Tusla, and I mean, I suppose what the view is, generally speaking, is not if but when you get hit. I mean, we seem to be
Hmm.
living in a constant threat landscape at the moment. It's an evolution from, as you say, people are kind of a reactive to a proactive kind of get your attack in first posture. I mean, everyone is kind of very aware and looking at data breach risks and kind of all the implications of what that means in terms of the cost of those things, and the war for cybersecurity talent as well, as I mentioned earlier. Compliance and regulations are escalating at a rate of knots on top of that, and equally in terms of reporting to, the SEC or whatever it is in terms of the stock markets, there is an expectation there within that context as well. Personal privacy is a huge issue, but that exposure to third-party risks, and it says multiple platforms. Lawrence, I mean, it's a very, very difficult one with the big organizations, particularly where they've got a lot of affiliates or subsets in terms of companies in different countries and so forth. So I mean that whole kind of, I suppose, what's your feeling on user awareness and training to get people up, or what's the path of least resistance to get to that golden egg?
This is a very topical question, actually. It's something that I've spoken with other organizations at webinars previously of that balance of technology, awareness, and training. Um, there has been a trend recently of investment into the future slash younger generation. I think it's fair to say that when we talk to cybersecurity, it tends to be
Would
of a
you still
certain,
fall into that category there, Lawrence?
oh, it depends who
Just
you
about
ask.
marginal. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm probably over the hill a bit, and I think we'll all agree that this world ages us a lot faster than other in other in other areas. But in terms of obviously leveraging that technology, the younger generation have grown up with technology, so they tend to get their head around it far quicker. So apprenticeship schemes for cybersecurity practices, security awareness officers, and things of that nature, even if it's just a compliance officer or a risk analyst coming out of university or even grad schemes and things of this nature, they're far quicker to pick up the technology than myself. I'm no genius at the Excels or the words. I'm constantly calling people internally to help me out with certain technology that we leverage here. So the awareness is critical, and it has to be part of the company culture. Where we see organizations dramatically improve their company culture is when they actually get their policies and procedures in place, whether that's leveraging
But
technology
there's
or
clear policies and procedures in plain English, for want of a better word, that people easily understand it. And that's what you're saying, and kind of get them when they're young, for that Jesuit term, but really at induction, point of induction, Lawrence, is that's what you're kind of saying?
exactly. And if everyone's doing it in the same way, so if we're just talking about a standard cyber, let's just say you've lost your laptop and everyone's aware at training, right? If you lose your laptop, you email this person, and here's the procedure that follows because you'll need to turn off their laptop, you need to shut them out, lock them out, transfer over all of their files if you're in the cloud or things of this nature, if you're using SharePoint, Microsoft Office, all of those things. And those clear policies and procedures, when people understand what they're doing, it increases buy-in. Because if people are doing it a certain way they don't quite understand, it's quite easy to say, not don't get it. I'll go back to my day job.
And do you see any role there for maybe incentives and kind of recognition, or for employees who, for instance, contribute to a secure environment or enhanced environment, or kind of making them kind of cyber heroes or something like that within the organization, or recognition? Or I mean, I'm a great believer in simulated phishing tests, that you do blind tests every now and then on the organization, and you target a few people and take a run at them and see if they kind of stick to protocol or they go off. Congratulations, you've won the Nigerian lotto, is kind of getting a bit old these days. But our feedback mechanism, something as old fashioned as feedback mechanisms from employees, just to kind of I mean, I'm sure you're the same, but the amount of false news, or kind of spurious emails or texts, more often now texts or
Mm.
WhatsApps you would get, if not on a daily, but certainly a weekly basis, you get one or two, that they're getting more sophisticated. They're looking very, if you're having a weak moment, you could kind of, Father Ted, there was a famous scene that many years ago where, do not push the button, Dougal. You could actually push the button kind of and go down the rabbit hole. I mean, what's your kind of sense of dealing with those sort of things?
Again, I think you're spot on in terms of the training and awareness. And we've had incidents and at former companies, considering I've always worked for like a risk management company or a cybersecurity company where and they are getting far more sophisticated. I've got a text before saying, "Hi, it's X," and it will be my CEO's first name. Can you double check this PowerPoint for me? That's quite scary to know that they can do that and get my personal number, not even my work phone. And so, depending on how large your organization could be, you might be not obviously be on a first name basis or feel the ability to speak to someone at that seniority. So you would do it. And of course, that leads into things. So the constant, I think the best policy really is those constant little bits every so often, rather than the right, we're going to spend an entire day in a classroom once a year with a consultant to say this is what we're going to do, because people will switch off after half an hour. If it's a lunch and learn about, okay, here's what a phishing email looks like, here's what you should do, here's who you report it to, that's fine. Get your head around it and go. And whether it's a monthly thing, a bi-monthly thing, all of these things can be implemented to make sure that it is top of mind, because it is really in terms of what can harm the business and your own organizations the most and can be quite critical. It can be a very scary source of failure for anyone in the
Ah,
organization to give access.
I mean, it's catastrophic. I saw it within the HSE that they were locked out of their own laptops for 6 months. I mean, it was a crazy scenario. And, maybe I think it remains to be seen. It could have been down to updating software in an appropriate fashion. I don't know the ins and outs of it. But I mean, what are the takeaways from some of the ones you've seen recently, some of the bigger hacks? Or, what would you say are the key two or three takeaways that front of mind?
I
And,
think, yeah, I think the scariest thing for me is in terms of some of the size of the organizations that we've seen hit the hardest. So banks, massive social media organizations, is I mean, we're talking sort of revenue of over 500 million pounds here quite easily,
that's
and
a nice
beyond.
neighborhood, Lawrence. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more the outdated procedures and technology. You'll talk to these people about, okay, let's sort of review about where we went wrong, and you'll see that they've got 30,000 assets all in a spreadsheet that lives on someone's on-premise laptop. And it's okay, what happens if they lose their laptop?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
don't know. And and that idea of obviously having that huge amount of responsibility as a single source of failure, everyone I think assumes that because they're so global and the technology that they give to the world in terms of social media and the responsibilities and service that they apply, everyone I think assumes that they have very strict procedures when it comes to these kind of protection and things of that nature. The honest truth is most of the organizations that I speak to are on spreadsheets, and it's probably got to the point where they think, okay, we should probably start investing in this part of our organization as well. So that is probably the scariest thing in terms of
And,
single
and
source of failure and these very easy things that can go wrong very quickly.
And I think it is funny. I mean, there's an assumption that there's a couple of boffins in a room somewhere, wherever that is, kind of who are gurus, black belts in IT, and they can kind of work their magic and stuff like that. And everyone always assumes that that's there. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, what are you seeing yourself in terms of, I guess, that whole area in terms of emerging best practice or technologies? what are you seeing that, what are people using to stay ahead of the whole threat environment?
Yeah, so I think now falls under what I'd call re-establish good practice internally. And the reason this is now coming around in terms of one, it's got to come from the very top, because they essentially hold the purse strings and they obviously can assign the budget for these very topics. So we're now seeing boards allocate budget for technology for this very purpose, because board oversight is now becoming far more prevalent. I'm sure a few years ago, and obviously way back when, it was very much like you said, they're in a room. I'm sure they're doing a good job. If I don't hear from them, that's a good week for us. Now they've got risk and audit committees and panels. And now what we're seeing as well is that previously auditors would come round, or maybe vendors, and say, all right, what's your IT security practice? And organizations would be able to say, we're ISO 27001 certified. And that would be enough. Now that's not enough. They actually now go, that's great. Show me and prove to me how you got certified and what your practices were. So in terms of where the sort of push is coming from, we're seeing more of it very much a top-down approach to being able to be aware of the threats. I think that's a critical part of where can we be hit, where are we vulnerable, and off the basis of this awareness and view across the organization from a holistic 360-degree view, where do we need to allocate these resources for that very reason?
And I mean, Lawrence, there's an old adage that ships were not built to stay in port. They need to go out onto the seas and trade, and I mean, how do organizations strike that balance between usability and commercial endeavor and engagement with consumers and the world out there? By definition, you have to go out to meet people and sell them stuff and get their checks back in. And security, when you're implementing best practices, how do you get the balance right? What is the balance? Do
Well,
we live like monks in a Trappist monk in a monastery and don't communicate, take a vow of silence, or how do we get around that digital
tech,
silence?
yeah, I mean, technology is always the way, because the technology, the levels of automation that that can be manipulated and used efficiently now for all platforms we're seeing across the world in terms of AI and how machine learning works for the good reasons, let alone the bad reasons. It's very much that, okay, setting thresholds internally, there's always going to be an element of threat and an element of risk across your organization. Understanding what level you're happy with is critical, and understanding, okay, what are we doing to obviously continue reducing it? What people need to understand, I think it is becoming more understood across organizations. And when I say across organizations, I also mean not just in their cybersecurity team. It's that risk is not something that you do on December 31st to send out an annual report of here's what we are doing. It
Mm.
has to be a continual production across the organization, not just for those, like you said, the
So it's
boffins stuck in a
systemic.
room.
Yeah, it's part of who we
Exactly.
are. Yeah.
Everyone has to buy into this. And the best way that organizations I've seen have been able to get buy-in and really mature their risk profile across the organization is having a consistent approach, making sure that everyone's aware of their roles and what happens in terms of their procedures and workflows that are put in place for these very incidents.
And I mean, if you're to, a lot of our members would be professional services to a large degree in that particular space. So, I mean, would there be industry specific cybersecurity risks that, professional service organizations should pay particular attention to?
Yeah, I think the critical ones of and where organizations, of course, because most of these organizations, unless they're non-for-profit, will be commercially minded, is what hurts them the most. So what would it mean to an organization if they failed their ISO 27001 certification? Well, in reality, all of their vendors might start looking at them as a bit of an unsafe organization to partner with. And we've already spoken about supply chain attacks. So given that level of
So
severity,
accreditation is very important within that context.
I think accreditation is very important to a degree. We see organizations, because of the cost it can take to get certified, we've
Yeah.
seen organizations use it as a guideline. But whether they go get fully certified is a very different topic due to the cost of it, whether it's internal or external. So making sure that you're abiding by industry standard frameworks to make sure that everyone's working in the same fashion, because it has to be a community buy-in. If you think you're doing best practice and someone else in your industry is doing it completely different,
Yeah.
someone's probably wrong.
That goes back to your original theory that everyone needs to be singing off the same hymn sheet to a large degree.
Exactly.
One of our colleagues on the, asked the question, what advice would you give to medium-sized businesses who want strong security policies to ensure they pass their customer supplier due diligence that you mentioned earlier?
Again, I think it would be one, having an in-house team, an expert, whether that's an external consultant, to understand the procedures, and then clear evidence. I think evidencing here is the strongest element where organizations
So
tend to
trust but
struggle with.
verify. Yeah.
Exactly, because it's all very well saying, okay, I've got all of these policies in place, but if you can very coherently and effectively show that, okay, here's how we got ISO certified because we're consistently updating and reviewing the effectiveness of all of our controls. Here's the scoring we got, and here's the evidence. That's a very quick way for a medium-sized organization to get the trust of a much larger organization that they wish to partner with, and obviously for the commercial reasons, that can be a very lucrative relationship that
Okay.
they can
Yeah.
then build.
Okay. And another question that's come in there is how has the remote work trend affected the landscape of cybersecurity risks, particularly over the last 36 months? And ultimately, what steps can organizations take to address these challenges? One, two, three, what would you reckon?
So it's been a very fast learning curve for I think everyone in this world. So the organizations that probably leveraged it the best were probably already obviously software companies because you practice what you preach. Being able to effectively communicate across the organization, and again, I think the real benefit of that is because obviously we're all remote and it's a lot harder to reach out to the head of IT for help if you're sat in your own room rather than they're sitting across the hallway and talking to someone else. It's those policies and procedures. So if you've got that single source of truth of here's if this happens, here's the next 6 stages that you do, and therefore the automated workflow would then trigger, depending on the severity of the incident, would trigger the correct person, and it flows very consistently. If everyone's doing it very ad hoc, it's probably going to end up in the wrong person's inbox, who will then ignore it. And then when it comes to review, you'll understand that actually it's now turned into a major incident. Whereas if you had a consistent approach across the organization, which at training and at induction of that employee was very much written in paper and they had the correct training, it'd very much mitigate the risks. And obviously, risk is okay and it's manageable because it hasn't happened yet. But once it starts elevating into incidents, that's when things like fines and restructuring of organizations takes place.
Okay. I mean, and it's very much kind of in the zeitgeist, and I think that's the general experience that a lot of the mid to larger scale organizations that we deal with are finding. And I mean, in your own experience, and I suppose to paraphrase a question that came in, I mean, how have these, when you're seeing major incidents at the moment, how have they evolved over the last kind of couple of years? And, what sort of tactics or techniques are you seeing more prevalent in the last 6 months? Are there any particular Uber trends that you're saying, here, a red flag, keep an eye out for these guys?
Yes and no. I think there's far more communication within sectors and verticals now.
Okay.
I think that's critical, and that's been spearheaded by I like to think the government, whether that's because of a major incident that's happened to one of the big guys, and then they all get together in a room and say, right, we've all got to be doing better here because we don't want to be the guys on the front page of the news saying that okay, obviously Barclays lost 35,000 customer data. That's an example. I don't know if they did. I've just off the top of my head.
Hmm.
So things of these natures, obviously we've seen Ofcom regulators. There's constantly new regulations coming in. But when these new regulations are coming in, there tends to be a element of discussion and opportunity to write and review within the sector. The telecom industry has got a new act coming out called the Telecom Security Act in 2024. That
Okay.
went through a huge review, and the likes of BT, Vodafone, O2, Virgin Media all had an input of what was best practice and how they can leverage all of these things. Automation is always key because that really reduces human error as well. So if you've got a really good automated workflow, the level of automation, if and again, it has to be correct automation, it has to be correct technology, and it has to be done for the right purposes. There's no point just chucking technology at it if it's not the right fit. But when we see automation used in the correct way, we tend to see human error reduce, which obviously reduces risk, and by nature, compliance increases, which increases confidence across not just the organization, but the industry, and most importantly, probably your customer base.
Mm. I'm reminded of the the rise of AI in terms of poor old Arnold Schwarzenegger all those years ago, and he's certainly come back with a bang. But in terms of security budget constraints, that's clearly one that CISOs are having a struggle with. And I'm going to ask you, one of our colleagues just asked the $6 million question, Lawrence. So in the old days, there would have been kind of metrics in terms of, say, a percentile of budget that you should equate towards marketing, say it was 10%, or advertising might be X, maybe 10% or whatever it was. So you'd have different cost socks or cost buckets or whatever silos. What's the metric? What's the ratio for cybersecurity?
I
What
think it's I
good
think
look
it's
like as a percentile of turnover?
oh that's a very good question. I think it's one very bespoke to each organization. I actually went through
Now,
this.
Lawrence, that's an opt-in.
It's
I'm
not
not
out.
giving you a hospital pass there now. Come on.
So, so what I mean by that is I actually went through this conversation a few days ago with an organization, and it's very much in terms of what's the most important and why are you leveraging this technology? What are you getting out of it? What challenges is it solving for you guys? So whether that's especially the mid-tier organizations tend to be understaffed and overworked. So if that means they're spending, I mean, the example I can give is I was talking to an organization and one guy we added up, he spent about 300 hours a year just doing reporting for his weekly reports, monthly reports, quarterly reports, and annual report. 300 times his weekly salary and whatever it was, it added up to a huge amount of money that they're spending where he should be doing other things. If the technology can come in and automate that entire process, he gets 300 hours back a year to do something else, whether that's endpoint descriptions, vulnerabilities, firewalls, and things of that nature. So being able to quantify it in that nature
Okay.
is critical. Whether you want to start leveraging things such as your GDPR fine, which is what 2% of
But I'm
revenue
going
or
to put you
20
on the
million.
spot now. I'm going to put you on the spot, Lawrence. Give us an average percentile.
Somewhere between 5% is probably a good starting point, depending where you're coming from. Because if you're using a spreadsheet, it's very hard to go to the board and ask for a huge amount of money when there's no spend already. So
Okay.
being able to understand that what the threats are, or if you're already leveraging technology, that's probably a more you're at a stronger perch for a discussion there. Because if you have never had a breach before and you've been doing a great job, but you've been working everywhere under the sun and you're a single source of failure, you go to your CISO or the CEO, say, actually, I'm overworked. I need a technology that's going to cost £50,000 to do what you're doing now. He's probably going to turn around and say, but I'm not spending any money right now on technology, and there's been no threats.
Mm.
So being able to obviously get the buy-in from the top down in terms of being proactive and what could happen. And it's not about scaring the board, it's about making them aware of
Well,
what the
fear
trends
is
are.
good, Lawrence. Fear is good. And I'd equally say the reason there hasn't been any security threats is probably because the software has been working. So we need to keep investing in it, as an aside. I mean, as a management consultancy profession, I suppose we're always kind of in that space of the evolution of I suppose costs in terms of being mindful of offering value and so on. So that's why we could ask that question of what sort of price metric are you looking at for a particular area. So that 5%, 10% kind of that sort of metric sounds about right. Maybe even a little bit low because of the complete reliance that organizations have now in terms of technology. There's the paper-based kind of system doesn't exist anymore. Even from an invoicing point of view, everything is invoiced digitally
Yeah.
now. So I suppose conscious of time, and another question that's come in as we're coming to the end of the session here. But I mean, if I was to ask you one, two, three, what are the three top current cybersecurity risks that you're seeing at the moment?
Supply chain risk is probably the top one.
Okay, that's interesting.
Um, One, because of, I think it's the volume, is probably the key thing here. And because of the nature of supply chain, where it'll go through so many different teams. So the cyber guys and the third party and the vendor risk teams will have a conversation about it. Procurement are probably going to get involved, as well as legal. That's
Yeah,
three different, if you're all on a spreadsheet here, or we're all talking over Word documents, which can't be evidenced or anything like that, you don't know what changes are being made,
yeah.
being able to evidence it. That's a real problem internally. Um, so that's probably the key thing here. Um, Data breaches, that's always going to be a huge concern.
Okay.
Um, One, just for
Hugely concerning, yeah, and the cost of dealing with them, yeah.
the cost of it, and it's not just obviously the fines and the cost of dealing with it, it's the reputational damage that it can cause.
Yeah,
And of
absolutely
course,
concur.
data breaches tend to involve personal data, whether
Yeah,
it's just my name and my email, all the way down to, of course, my bank account details,
yeah.
and things of that nature. And that goes far beyond whatever fine that might be leveraged, because once you've lost your reputational damages, people will go elsewhere, and it's really hard to get that trust back.
Or even worse, the embarrassment of being kind of outed as a Manchester United City or supporter or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which I'm not.
Mortification involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I'd probably say non-compliance. And what I mean by that is, again, these are very top of mind things. So
Yeah.
you hear about organizations failure to comply to GDPR. And I appreciate that might overlap with data breaches, but GDPR is personal data. People are very aware of it, and it's very much top of mind right now. So
Okay.
any
Those
sort
are
of
the three.
if you see in the news that this organization has got a huge GDPR fine, you do you really want to sign up to their newsletter or give them any of your personal information? You probably don't, and it's probably really again it's probably very very difficult to reestablish that trust in the public site.
Okay. And one final question from one of our colleagues there, I see come in. What's keeping CEOs, CISOs, directors awake at night?
That's a really good question, actually, especially because those tend to be the ones fighting it at the very top level. And it's probably one of the newer C-suite roles that we've come about. Fear of the unknown's a very big one. If you can't go to your CISO and say, "What's our top 10 risks this week?" and he's spluttering and doing things of that nature, that can be something very scary, because ultimately somewhere in there is going to be result in a breach or an incident, and then someone's going to ask the question of why didn't you know? Because it will fall onto him. So that's probably one, fear of the unknown, and that counts to visibility, and that counts to accountability. So I want to know if I'm the CISO, which team's looking after what, who's looking after
That's interesting.
these base of controls. Is there a deadline? Yes. Why did you miss that? Why wasn't I notified? So all of these things which are coming in, and that speaks to preparedness. What we've started seeing, and I don't think there's what we will see, I think, in the next, if we're going to look ahead for the next 5 years, is there's been a massive spike in cybersecurity insurance for
Saw that.
obvious reasons.
An escalating cost.
Exactly. What we will probably start seeing, and this is something that I've listened to at certain speeches in America and in Europe actually, is that cybersecurity insurance will probably stop paying out if you're on a spreadsheet. Because if you're handling that amount of data, they're
Ah,
going to start considering it as recklessness slash you didn't do your end of the bargain. Because you might have fire insurance, but if I leave my oven on with foil in it and it sets on fire, they're probably not paying out, because that's actually on me. So there has to be a level of responsibility from both parties here. So having cyber insurance is fantastic, and we're seeing a huge spike in it. But we've seen it, and I think it's going to probably start in America, as things do because of their nature for insurance companies and things of that nature. But for cyber insurance companies to really start hammering into what were you doing to prevent the breach and why should I pay out?
gosh, that'll be a huge tectonic plate movement there in terms of spreadsheets, and that'll be an evolution in terms of how we go about our business. Wow, as a single takeaway, that's extraordinary kind of potent, because if we see that, and it will inevitably follow, because once there's one or two big insurance payouts, as there will be, that will,
Mhm.
we see that in the car industry, so it'll follow as night follows day. And the other takeaway I would take from that is, I suppose, unlike wine, bad news in terms of the cyber hacking and all that doesn't improve with age. People need to know quicker, and the reactive time of response, it's 24/7. You really need to get ahead of it as quickly as possible. And I suppose advise all your stakeholders of the issue outside of the 36-hour rule, in terms of GDPR, in terms of that space, which in of itself is quite daunting. But I think you're looking at a 2 to 4 hour window at this stage in terms of effective response and getting out ahead of it, which is very, very, very challenging. Lawrence, this has been really interesting, and I suppose I'm conscious of time. We said people would have them out in 40 minutes so that they could have a bowl of soup or a sandwich. I don't know how to thank you. It's been exciting. You've shared an awful lot of knowledge with us. It's been really good. I know a lot of people are going to be watching this later on YouTube when we put it up, and maybe if you're so disposed, we might have you back again later on in the year to tell us, put the fear of God in us, and tell us what's happening. Further down the line, and we can all put our hands up and say who hasn't been hacked at this stage. It'll be like getting COVID. But in the meantime, I wish that you have every success in your journey along the cyber career that you've chosen. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. It's really been lovely to speak with you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I think we've covered all the questions that have come in. Conscious of people's time, we're bang on the nose for 1:40, so people will be able to get that bowl of soup and sandwich. And thank you for joining us for the Institute's Lunch and Learn, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next one. And thank you to Board Match Intelligence for sponsoring this event. All the
Brilliant.
best. Good luck.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Bye bye.